Dr. Mary is a clinical psychologist and friend who's just returned from an overseas trip working in an area that is very close to my heart, and I know many of your hearts. Welcome back.
Thank you.
You were there, you were in Bangladesh and India, and you were working with victims of trafficking.
Yes, human trafficking.
Tell me a little bit about it.
Well, it was an amazing trip, first of all. I mean, the countries are beyond beautiful. But it was something that I've been thinking about actually for a very long time. This whole issue of human trafficking has become more and more public. And I've always felt a call to somehow get involved with that, just because of my years of working with women who've been sexually abused. So when I went there, I wasn't exactly sure what to expect. But what was incredible was a couple of things. One, just the universality of human suffering and pain and stories. And the second thing was that these girls and women were so beautiful, not just physically, but internally. They had, we ended up having times with them that was full of laughter and joy. And sometimes in our thinking of people who've gone through such devastating trauma and abuse, we just see them as victims and see them as trauma, like that's their label. But then to see that they're more than that, that these are beautiful young girls with stories beyond just the trauma, that was what was so remarkable to me. And I loved hanging out with them. I loved to make them laugh. I loved just being just myself with them, as opposed to it being, I'm a therapist and I'm here to help you with your trauma.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite experiences in Cambodia, hanging out with young girls who've been through it, is I brought them all a bunch of nail polish.
Oh, perfect.
You know, and facials, because I wanted them to just be girls, you know, and that's what I saw so much. They were all painting each other's nails and they were trading out stuff and they were giggling, and we've been to soccer games and out for dinner, and you know, it's one of the things that breaks my heart so much when I do these stories and we talk about, you know, we Crossroads Relief and Development, we fund projects to help heal these girls. I can't usually show their faces. And part of that is that they need to go on in life in a culture that says that they're garbage. And if it gets back that this is their past, then sometimes it blocks their future and it brings shame. And so we don't want to get in the way of their healing, but when I can't show their faces are the story. The beauty and the joy of how God is restoring them is the story.
Yes, exactly. And that's, for me, going there, again, I didn't know what to expect, but that was a predominant emotion. It was joy, because you could see God so at work there. And that's like, and also you could see the relationships and the love that the caregivers, they would call them aunties, would have for these young girls. And it brought me to tears. I couldn't help myself just watching the interactions and seeing the love that the aunties had for the girls. And I was able to encourage these aunties and say, you know, that is hugely what God is doing through you to heal these girls. The fact that they can feel safe with you, the fact that there can be honesty with the fact that they're suffering, but at the same time, it's okay, I still accept you, and there's no shame.
One of the surprising things we found out, you know, we funded different programs to help rehabilitate and heal girls that were trafficked, and one was very clinical psychologist, and one was like a big daddy who was just loving on them and spoiling them. And we always thought the clinical psychologist program was better because, you know, they were like very highbrow, very trained. And when we started dealing with people who came out of both those programs, we actually realized the girls who had just been loved, like lavished on, loved, were actually doing way better, way further in their healing journey than the one who'd had all the psychological help. And it made me realize love is the answer to healing.
It is. And actually part of what I do in my work is if I can be in relationship with you and you can sense my care and my love, empathy and understanding, acceptance of you, that's the biggest part of the journey. It's not what I tell you, it's not the steps that I make you go through. So it is, yes, there is some educating, there is some therapeutic things that have to happen, but without that foundation of love and acceptance, then it's just really kind of empty words. And it doesn't really change lives.
It blows me away over and over and over again. You know, as people of faith, that's really the number one thing. We need to show people God's love, and it's so hard for us because we're so busy, or we can get judgmental, or, you know.
Or we're scared. So something I heard fairly commonly, which kind of breaks my heart, is people be like, oh, you're going to go work with these girls from, you know, sex trafficking? Oh my goodness, I could never do that because that would just be too painful for me to see. And that breaks my heart because, you know, God could be calling people to care for in some way these young girls. And if you can see them as more than just victims and that you're just there to love them and to encourage them, It doesn't have to scare you. Pain doesn't have to scare you. Seeing another person's pain doesn't have to scare you, because I don't have to fix it. I don't have to have the answers. But if I can just sit with you as you kind of process your pain, that's powerful.
Especially when they're in a culture, I think, that considers them to be garbage or non-healable. Like, I know that's in Cambodia. I don't know about Bangladesh and India, but I could only guess. And so when they have these cultural messages that are constantly telling them that they're not worth anything, that they'll never be worth anything, that they're garbage now because they've been used that way, to have people who are saying, no, that's not true, and you're so valuable and you're so loved, I mean, that's incredible impact.
Yeah, it's very true. It's very true.
Well, you know, I think of people watching this show because, you know, sexual abuse is so prevalent. So when I first started working with these girls, I remember thinking, like, I have friends, I would say, and I don't know if I'm unusual, but I would say like about 3/4 of the people that I know have been through some form of sexual abuse or molestation, men and women.
Yes.
And those are the ones who are actually being honest, because a lot of people never talk about it. So maybe I'm a little skewed, I don't know, because I'm a compassionate person, and I've known a lot of people, so I never judge people who go through that. It doesn't even affect me in one way, they're just victimized, right? But so I think people feel safe to tell me, but I thought about how hard their journey to healing was. I've walked so many of them as they've gone to counseling, and you know, it's such a fight for even just one incident.
Right.
And I've wondered, is it possible to heal people who've been, you know, molested and abused and raped and tortured even, like hundreds, if not thousands of times?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's not an easy journey, because when you've been so traumatized, the common response is to avoid dealing with it and to put it aside and just say, it's past, I moved on. Or sometimes the brain will even repress those memories, and people won't have the memories resurface until much later in their life. It's just kind of a way of coping. And it works, but it doesn't really work, because it interferes with their ability to form deep relationships with others, to trust people, to trust God even. And there's sometimes fear responses that happen out of the blue over little triggers, because it happens to remind them of their abuser. So it's so important to enter into it and to say, I am worth it, because I want freedom at the end of it. And it is a long journey. It takes a safe relationship. Typically, people who've been abused will do better if they are able to go for counseling, professional counseling, because that is a person who can handle the enormity of their pain and trauma. And they can be fully honest without worrying about what my friends are going to feel or have to do. And they also know how to kind of hold and contain that pain while they help them work through some of the implications of that. So it's the long-term relationship with the therapist, but also some therapeutic techniques that we do that actually helps them deal with the trauma themselves in a more gentle way, so that there becomes freedom.
Yeah, because I think it's hard sometimes for people in regular relationship with them. Sometimes because they've been betrayed, I know that they like test that love. They think they're really not, they don't really deserve it, so they keep thinking you're going to reject them, so they keep testing you to see, right? So then it's hard to love somebody who's constantly pushing you away or behaving in a way that's awful.
That's right, and that's exactly it. Sometimes the behavior is perplexing, but it actually even pushes you away. It's so common.
Yeah.
And when you look at abuse, especially sexual abuse, it strikes so much at the core of the person. It strikes at their capacity to trust and to believe that they're worthy, because often there's a lot of shame. Like somehow I did something to, and sometimes abusers will even say that if you had not done this, or if you, it's all your fault. And if you are abused as a young girl or young boy, you don't have any concept of truth. And on top of that, if that abuser is a trusted person, whether a parent or an uncle or a neighbor, then you're completely betrayed and you don't know who to trust.
You don't even trust your judgment anymore.
How can you? Because this person who's supposed to love me is also the source of my greatest pain. And I have to still be in relationship potentially with this abuser. So how do you handle that? That's beyond what a child can handle. So of course they develop all sorts of behaviors and avoidance strategies that kind of help them cope with it. And like I said, it kind of works, but it typically will lead to things that I will test the relationships, I will push people away, or I will avoid.
Or I'll be controlling. I see that too, because when they lost control, they were victimized.
Yes.
So staying in control is the most important way to protect themselves.
Right.
That's hard to be in relationship with.
Exactly. Because there's kind of three lies that happen. First of all, it's my fault. The second of all is that I am powerless. And the third is that I'm not safe. So when we actually work with these victims for treatment, those are the three things that we begin to help them embrace. I am safe. I can take care of myself. I can protect myself. God will take care of me, will help me through this. I am not at fault. It's not something that I chose to have happen to me. And I am powerful. I do have power to impact my life. Now, the deeper spiritual question, though, is why did God let this happen to me?
Wow.
Right?
How do you answer that question?
And how do you
That's
answer that
huge.
question? And
How do you-
well, I would never say, well, God has a plan for your life and don't worry about it, because that's minimizing their feelings of betrayal towards God. Because God somehow let it happen. And so a lot of times I will sit with them through their anger. I will encourage them to be honest about sharing their betrayal with God. But then we will often invite Jesus into those memories, and they will experience his presence and his compassion and even his tears for the pain that they went through.
It's so beautiful.
Yeah, and that's where the healing can happen, where it's like, in this world we will have trouble, and God has allowed it, but in his sovereignty and love, he will turn it around. He will redeem it if we let him do that.
So if people are watching right now and they've experienced some form of abuse, what would you say to them, even to where to start to unpack that? You know, and say they can't afford a counselor. I know that counseling is ideal and we should encourage that, but is there anything they can do even?
There are like support groups that you can go through that are, you know, the hospitals put on that are no cost. Many churches will have support groups. Pastors can also help. I mean, you don't always have to be a professional to be able to walk with somebody. Eventually, they probably will need some professional help depending on their level of trauma. But again, that's where a community can come around, and perhaps there can be some help even in financing or connecting them with somebody who can do a sliding scale fee to help them with that.
That's amazing. Well, thank you so much for your thoughts on it and your compassion. It comes through so clearly. I really appreciate your heart to help people heal and walk them through that.
Thank you.
If you've been watching this and you may have experienced abuse yourself, you may know somebody who's experienced abuse, we have a number on the screen that you can call right now, or people can start that journey praying for you. And sometimes those answers are partially spiritual. You need God in that process sometimes to put you back together. And so we just want to say there's absolutely no shame in asking for help. So many people have been through this, probably more than you can even realize. So we just want to encourage you today, give that number a call. Let somebody talk with you, pray with you, unpack some of that pain. Even just getting it out, getting that poison out and that anger out is part of that process of healing, and we want to help you along on it.